Hello again. So this is our overview series on sound desks. We've got an Allen & Heath Z18 desk. So in this video is all about the equalisation or the tone control. So this is where we can take creative control over the sound and we can alter the amount of bass or treble, and there's also a control in the middle that allows us to control a particular frequency and then boost it or turn it down, or attenuate as that's sometimes called, the sound at a given frequency. Now this is a bit techy, so bear with me, we'll go through it, won't rush it, and we'll go through and explain how that side of things works. So on this desk, the equalisation is this section across the middle here. We've got 3 blue knobs and a darker grey knob, and also a little button hiding in there as well. I'll zoom in on the iPad and then refer to that so you can see what we're talking about. So all sound desks have a different structure of equalisation. This is a very common structure where we've got a higher frequency one, so a treble one, and this is at that 12 kHz is 12 kilohertz. That's really quite high treble. And we've got a low frequency knob, which is, we've got the high frequency, then 4 knobs lower is the low frequency knob, and that's at 80 hertz. That's the bass one. So we've got the bass and the treble, and they're quite broad. So although it says 80 hertz, if you turn it down, it will affect an amount either side of that. It's not a really defined, it only does 80 hertz. That's what they call the center frequency, and then it affects frequencies either side of it, but in like a curve. So 80 hertz is the middle, and then it affects the frequencies either side at a curve. So it's not a hard cut off, it's a gentle, so it's acoustically transparent. If you don't really hear it. So I'll come to the mid frequency in a minute, because that's the most complicated. This button at the top, again I'll zoom in on the iPad, so it's just underneath the gain knob. That 100 hertz button, if you press that in, what that does is, it's called a bass roll off, or sometimes called a high pass filter, and what that does is it rolls off the bass, or it allows the treble frequencies through. Now generally speaking, that's used on vocal microphones to get rid of the bassier sounds. So if you've got a handheld microphone with a singer, if they're not used to using a mic, they might shake it a little bit, or you might get a little bit of handling noise on it, which is bassy. So you press that button in and it will reduce that. It won't get rid of it altogether, but it will reduce it. Also, if you've got somebody who in their singing is quite poppy, so their P's particularly are quite breathy and quite poppy, that can overload the microphone, and that again, that high pass frequency and the bass roll will get rid of some of that that poppiness, that bass. I generally use the high pass filter on most of my microphones, whether it's a lectern mic or a lapel radio mic or a handheld radio mic or a singer's mic. I'll generally put the high pass filter in. I've also done it on drums. So on a snare drum, I don't want that picking up the bass drum perhaps, so I'll roll the bass off on that. And again on cymbals and that sort of thing. You wouldn't use it on a bass guitar or a piano or any instrument where you want that full range. So microphones, vocal microphones, that would be my go-to. I'd automatically have it on. Other microphone sound sources, you do it selectively. So that's the little button for high pass filter. We've talked about the high frequency, we've talked about the low frequency. So the high frequency affects 12 kilohertz, the low it affects 80 hertz at the lower end of the spectrum. And this mid frequency, if I zoom in on the iPad to that one, that's full screen now, you'll see on there we've got 2 knobs. The lower knob that you can see is between -15 and +15. Now that's decibels, so when it's at 12 o'clock like is shown in the picture, that's neither boosting or cutting that given frequency. If I turn the knob fully anti-clockwise to -15, I would then be turning down or attenuating the given frequency. So in this instance, as it's shown in the manual, the higher knob, as you can see, is at 650 Hertz. So if I turned it down to -15, it would be turning 650 Hertz and a gentle curve either side of it down by 15 decibels. And if I turned it up, it will be increasing 650 Hertz. Now, generally speaking with microphones, I try not to use equalisation at all. I would rather get the microphone placement right and get the right microphone, but there are inevitably times when you can't avoid using it. So the mid-frequency I generally use for getting rid of feedback or stopping someone sounding like they've got a cold, or maybe for creative control. So for getting rid of feedback, if we've got a microphone that's whistling, feeding back, generally it will be a lapel microphone, so like a lapel radio microphone or your main lectern microphone. If it's feeding back, so you've got that squealing sort of a sound, what you can do is turn the gain, the mid-frequency gain knob down. So you might turn that down to, I've turned it down to 9 o'clock just for this. And then if you turn the mid-frequency round, there will be a point at which you will find the same frequency as the feedback, and the feedback will stop. Now, with a bit of practice and experience, you'll be able to go straight to that frequency and find it and cut it, and engineers that have been doing sound for a long time, they might have a separate graphic equaliser that's got 31 little sliders on it, and they will go to that, get the right frequency and turn it down, and they'll get it right first, maybe second time. You just learn it, you just learn the frequencies. So that's how to get rid of feedback. The method I've shown you is a bit crude, it's a bit clunky, but it works. And for those of us that aren't engineers, turning the mid-frequency volume down and then sweeping the frequency knob round until you find it is the easiest way. Now what you might then do is just turn the mid-frequency volume back up a little bit again, because there's a balance now, there's a compromise between getting rid of the sound that we don't want, which is the feedback, and it affecting the tone that we might want. So turning it down to, as I've got 9 o'clock, is quite a crude measure, and we'll cut lots off, but it helps us to find the frequency. But we might then just turn it up a little bit, so we're still in the, we're still getting rid of that frequency enough to get rid of the feedback, but we've introduced a gentler or a rounder tone now. So the other use of the mid-frequency is if you've got someone who's particularly sibilant, which is where you've got a sound in the microphone. Sibilance as a frequency band generally sits around 3 to 4 kilohertz. So on this knob, if we go to the iPad, we'd have to turn the frequency knob round all the way to fully clockwise, so 3 to 4 kilohertz, and then we would use the mid-frequency volume control and just back that off, just turn that down 1 or 2 notches. Those notches are probably just a bit counting 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. Yeah, they're 3 decibels per notch on the dial. So 3 to 6 decibels is probably enough just to calm that sibilance down a little bit. And I talked about if someone's maybe got a bit of a cold and their voice might sound a bit muffly, it's the same kind of frequency range, about 3 kilohertz. If someone's just sounding a bit under the weather, then if you turn that frequency back round to around and about 3 kilohertz, but this time boost it, so this time take the mid-frequency volume and maybe give it 1 notch, so 3 decibels, you'll just introduce clarity to their voice. It's just the frequency which, for men or women, it just lifts their voice and just gives them clarity. And you can do the same thing if you've got a singer who's not coming through, not cutting through the mix very well. We don't always want to turn that person up and up and up. But if we just tweak the EQ a little bit, it can often make the difference, and they'll be heard through the mix. So that's EQ. The best thing I can tell you with equalisation is to set up a microphone in your church, and with the sound system on and everything, wire it in. If you have the microphone in front of the speakers, you can make it feedback by turning the slider up and down, and if you keep one finger or one hand on the slider, then you can push it up and up and up until you can hear the feedback ringing, and then you can play with the equalisation to just get an idea of what frequency sits where. It is one of those things you just have to try and do and just learn it. But the reason why you keep one hand on the fader is because it gives you a control that if you don't quite get to the frequency, feedback will continue to build and build and build. So you can just back it off on the fader so we don't do any damage. Feedback left to its own devices will just get louder and louder and louder and risks damaging the speakers. So that's why we want to get rid of it in the first place. Not aside from the fact that we don't want people in the room hearing it, but keeping, as I say, keep one hand on there on the gain on the slider, so you can just ride it, as some people call it, ride the gain, ride the volume, whilst you play with the EQ. Again, if you've got someone who can talk on a mic, or maybe play a CD through the sound system, you can play with the bass, the treble, and get it, just have a go at learning how to do it. Very often when we go into desks and if we go to churches and help them with their sound, the EQ when I get there will be all over the place, and the first thing I do is reset everyone to 12 o'clock. And then get them and re-go through and re-sound check, if you like, and reset each one. EQ is very, very handy, but I would tend to use it as a last resort rather than automatically. The last thing is with equalisation is for creative control. So I mentioned miking up drums or certain instruments in a previous video. So if you're miking up a hi-hat, for example, I might take the bass off it and I might turn the mid frequency round to probably about 500 hertz, somewhere around there. So on here, on this one, that's with the dial at kind of 11 o'clock, 10, 11 o'clock. And again, turn it down. So I'm getting rid of the frequencies that I don't want that microphone to pick up. If I'm miking a drum kit, generally as a minimum, I'd have a bass drum mic, a snare drum mic, and then a pair of overheads. And I just want each mic to pick up the respective channel. So I'll use the EQ creatively to get rid of the sounds that I don't want in that microphone. So that's equalisation.